Donald Trump knows how to make the economy climb, but only a few people are going to benefit from that growth.
So you think wealth inequality is going to continue?
If you are unprepared for a decade of difficulty, you're fucked.
Andrew Bustamante is a former CIA officer.
He teaches people how to use real-world spy tactics for business and life.
With over 800,000 subscribers.
He's one of the most popular mentors on the internet.
When it comes to any kind of government-backed intelligence service, there's nobody who's outside of reach. We have let ourselves fall victim to populist politics. The United States is destined for at least a full 10 years of pain.
In your opinion, what can be done? We just met. Can you say 3 things about me that you learned in our short interaction that I never told you?
Yeah, you're wealthy, but you're humble. I would also say that you are most likely in a relationship with an extrovert. And then I would also venture to assess that you don't come from a lot of advanced education, that you're kind of built yourself from scratch.
How did you know? How did you figure that out? Because those are all, maybe the humble, I don't know, but the rest of them are true, right? Especially I am married to an extrovert. I do come from very humble beginnings and just a high school education. I went to college for 1 day. But how did you figure that out just in a few minutes of chatting with me?
So there's a couple of things. One, the way that you're dressed. The way that you're dressed does not denote a person who comes from wealth, but it also does not denote a person who is focused on what other people think of them, right? So you've developed companies and you've sold companies. You're self-funding your own media position. So there's obviously disposable income there, but you're not wearing that disposable income. You have a nice pair of shoes on, relatively kind of specialized pair of shoes, but your shirt and your pants are just standard, right? You put care and attention into your beard shape and into your hair, but not so much care and attention that it's obvious. You're also naturally very kind of reserved, and you mentioned being married. So if you're a reserved person and you're married and you're functioning to the place where you can run companies, it's most likely that your spouse is opposite wiring than you. She has to absorb and lift you up in those places where you're feeling down. So if you are an introvert, it's very likely that she is an extrovert. If you are the person who tears yourself down, she is most likely the person who builds you up. If you're the person who has a low libido, she is most likely the person that has the high libido.
You're blowing my mind. And how would agents use this type of information to kind of get what they want out of a conversation?
So there's multiple layers that happen when it comes to developing a target, right? When you talk about an agent, what our terminology is, you're developing an asset, you're developing a target. Before they are an asset provides information. Before they're an asset, they're just a target. You don't know if they have any information that's meaningful. So when you're developing a target, it's important to try to understand what the leverage points are for that target. What can you say or do, because you can only control yourself. What can you say or do that will rapidly build trust in that person? And then once you have built that trust, you can use that trust to explore what they have access to in terms of sensitive information. If they have access to sensitive information, then they already trust you, and you're that much closer to being able to have them give you that sensitive information, whether it's a thumb drive or a secret. So a big part of what we do when we assess an individual, like I just assessed you, is build a profile. Just a temporary assessment is the term that we use to determine whether or not what we're assessing is accurate. There's a chance that you actually are very focused on your wardrobe and today was just an off day. There's a chance that you're not in a functioning relationship and that your partner is just like you. There's a chance that my entire assessment could have been wrong. So my goal is to assess quickly and then start to probe to see whether or not I get information that confirms or rejects my previous assessment. All in an effort of trying to build trust. By telling you what my assessment was, I actually broke some of that trust. When you didn't know what my assessment was, you may have trusted me actually more because I could have continued saying things that just seemed to be in line with your beliefs. Now you know that I have a pre-existing idea, so whenever I say something to you from now on, you're going to wonder whether or not I'm just manipulating you.
And the CIA trains you to make anyone trust you instantly, is that right?
It's not instant, but it's fast. Right. We call it rapid trust, yeah.
And what's the one trick that works on everybody?
I don't mean to be particular about terminology, but terminology is something that's very important to us. So we don't call them tricks, we call them tactics or tools, right? One of the fastest, most effective tactics for getting someone to trust you and trust you rapidly is by mirroring them. Now, mirroring at a very basic level is something that people do all the time, right? You make eye contact when you're mirroring somebody else's eye contact. If they're leaning forward, you're leaning forward. I mean, you and I are literally at the same table, leaning in the same way, wearing the same color shirt. There's a lot of mirroring that's happening naturally, and mirroring subconsciously creates the idea that the person you're talking to is just like you. But mirroring that is visible is the most basic kind of mirroring. You can also mirror people through the words that you use. You can mirror people through the speed that you speak. You can mirror people through mirroring their beliefs or their ideas. So if you started talking about Christianity, I would start talking about Christianity to try to mirror your ideology and then continue to build that foundation of trust. So these tactics are all very, very powerful. They're psychologically viable. They're empirically proven. It's just a matter of how many can you layer in as short a period of time as possible so that you can hook that target, confirm their access, and make them into an asset.
So if you had to have like a 3-step playbook, number 1 is mirror them. So if they're talking about something, you're talking about that same topic. What's step 2, step 3?
So step 1 would actually be to listen. When you appear, you listen, right? I don't know if you recall when we first met, I was asking questions and listening to your story more than telling you my story or making my demands, right? So step 1 is listen. Step 2 is mirror. If you don't listen, you can't possibly mirror, because you won't be able to replicate their belief set. You won't be able to replicate their voice patterns, their words, their speech pace, any of that. And then step 3 is to continue to explore, to probe further. You've got to get new information so that you can mirror that new information, but you also still have to listen. So you ask questions, you see how they respond to the questions. Some people have sensitivities. We call them red lights, green lights, and yellow lights at CIA. If I were to ask you a question about how much money you have in the bank, that might be a red light topic. And you will show me in your body language, and you will show me in your verbal language, whether or not that's something you're willing to talk about or not willing to talk about. Some people are a hard stop, and they'll just say they're not going to talk about money. But other people will talk about money, but they'll talk about it on a periphery. They may not give a number, but they'll talk about generalities. Other people will jump right into specifics. And you need to know where that person's sensitivities are, red, yellow, green, so that you can pick the next round of questions to further probe and further observe and further assess.
Guys, we've been so passionate about finding the biggest geniuses, and this is just one of the many episodes. If you want to make sure you don't miss the next one, make sure to subscribe. All right, let's get back to the episode. Okay, let's pivot. You were applying for the Peace Corps when a pop-up appeared on a government website and a FedEx envelope arrived with a plane ticket, a rental car, and a hotel reservation. What made you actually get on the plane?
There's a phrase that we have for people who end up at the farm, at CIA's training boot camp, right? And we call ourselves too dumb to quit. We make very high risk decisions without thinking them through just because we are hyper focused on what comes next, instead of what are the risks, what are the implications. So I've discovered, as I've gotten older, that most people I meet would never get on a plane, go to a hotel, and show up to a car rental center for a paper reservation that they got 24 hours earlier via FedEx. Most people would say no to that. They'd see all the problems, all the risks. But at 27 years old in the military, that's not how I saw it at all. I saw it as like this adventure, this opportunity, this chance to go into the unknown, to boldly go into the unknown and kind of see what comes next. Like, it's so different from my normal life. My normal life is uniforms and alarm clocks and doing the same thing day after day and answering to a colonel and, dressing the same way and keeping my hair within regs. The idea that somebody would think I'm special enough to send me a paper airplane ticket overnight via FedEx, I'm all in. That's exactly what made me a good fit for CIA and what makes other people not a great fit.
And did the CIA know that about you?
The whole process is part of CIA's training and vetting process to determine whether or not a new candidate could make it to full-blown officer or not. Because once you're actually part of CIA, you never have the whole story. And you have to accept that you're not being given the whole story. You have to accept that your superiors are lying to you from the moment they tell you about an operation. And you still have to accept it, and you still have to go out there, and you still have to be the person on the X, not even knowing how dangerous the situation really is, because that's part of the job. And that has to make you excited, and that has to make you curious, and you have to be up for that challenge to really thrive at a place like CIA, because it's a whole community of secret keepers. And the older they are, the longer they've been keeping secrets, and the more skilled they are at manipulating you. And your only hope is to stay there, last long enough that you can become as skilled as the people above you.
So you get off the plane, you walk into a waiting room, and you see 10 other people there who also had maybe no idea exactly why they were there. What did you think you were being selected for?
When I got my phone call, my invitation, my packet from FedEx, everything was for an unnamed position in national security. So I knew that I was going into a national security type of interview. My mind was kind of running wild with, it could be DEA, or it could be FBI, or it could be CIA, it could be NSA. And then I start kind of weighing the realities of what I'm good at and not good at, right? I'm not good at anything related to computers, so NSA is probably not realistic. I had a strong military record, but I hated being in the military, so it's probably not the DIA. And could it be CIA? Could it be FBI? Who knows? So when I walk into the waiting room and I see 10 other people in there, and they're all exactly what you would expect people to look like waiting for a government interview, right? They're all in suits or pencil skirts. They're mostly Caucasian. They're all within the same 5 or 7 years of age. They're all between 25 and 32. They all look educated. They all look clean cut. They all look, there's no dreadlocks. There's no rainbow colored hair. So I'm kind of, confirmed that I am here, they are also here, and we are all waiting for something to do with national security, because these folks look just like your central casting for government employee.
And when the CIA told you what they actually saw in you, what landed the hardest? Did you end up building your identity then around anything that they said?
The thing that landed the hardest was all the dirty stuff that they just understood right away, right? The misaligned loyalty. I was always somebody looking to be loyal to someone, and I never really knew who I could be loyal to. So because of that, my loyalty would jump from person to person. I'd be extremely loyal to my mom. And then eventually, after enough instances of my mom violating my trust, then I would pull my loyalty away from her. But I couldn't just trust myself. I had to now align myself with someone else. So maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was a girlfriend, maybe it was a best friend. And I would always be looking for someone to be loyal to, because what I was always looking for was someone to validate my effort, my intelligence, my thoughts, my ideas, right? CIA figured that out very, very quickly. And one of the things that they told me in that first round of interview is they were like, we think that you would be a good fit for CIA's National Clandestine Service. And they told me that they thought I'd be a good fit because it's a mission that I can be loyal to forever. And I wouldn't have to continue to try to find someone worthy of my effort, worthy of my intelligence, worthy of my time. It would always be in service of the American people and American primacy and the defense of the nation. And for me, again, 27 years old at the time, it was like a silver bullet. I was like, oh shit, you already know that I bounce around in loyalty, and now you're telling me that there's actually a cause I can get behind forever? That's a really compelling offer.
And how do they know that about you?
So part of CIA's recruitment process is how they recruit you. So things like phone calls and FedEx letters, and whether or not you show up, whether or not you show up on time, how you dress, right? They watch you from beginning to end. But then the other thing that they have going on is they have access to your entire background. So for me, coming from the military, coming from a military academy, I was a more open book than the average person. So all of my childhood records that had to do with mental health, all of my military records that had to do with physical health, disciplinary infractions, education, how I transformed from year to year, they had all of that. And when in 2007, when I was at CIA, we were already using AI to help consolidate large databases of information to create summaries and meaningful conclusions, right? So that inside the recruitment process just further expedited their capability.
You were using AI in 2007?
2007.
Like a form of ChatGPT or Claude?
I mean, yeah, it's a very rudimentary form. If you could imagine, now you can speak in plain text. You couldn't speak in plain text back then. You had to be trained how to use certain systems. There were lots of fields that you had to kind of fill in. None of the AI companies that come to mind now were the companies that we were using then. So whatever that first generation was, either evolved, failed, was consumed by someone else, et cetera. But it's no surprise to me to see AI's capability now, because even back then it was being introduced.
You could profile someone and prompt this AI in 2007 to say, hey, tell me about XYZ person, give me a brief on this person, and it would do its research or homework through AI and give you that brief?
Correct. It just wouldn't have the same access that AI has now. Right now, AI has access to the entire web, right? When you're on a air-gapped system, it only has access to what's within that air gap. But that was a very powerful tool that we were able to use back then to scrub lots of clandestine files simultaneously.
What's a big misconception people think about you and what you do?
One major misconception, I think, is even in the title of this show, right? Like Decoded Genius implies that the people on this show are of higher intellectual capability, right? Geniuses. And many people think that CIA officers are very smart, very intelligent, above average intelligence. In my experience with myself and with many people at CIA, that's not really the case. We are pretty firmly average. If there are above average people, there are also plenty of below average people, because the job requires different skill sets. And frankly speaking, there are certain skills that above average intelligence people just will never learn, because they understand the inherent danger, they understand the inherent kind of villainy of what they're doing. So one of the major misconceptions is that CIA officers are brilliant. Some of them really are, but most of them are not. Most of them are very typical average people who are just working hard, trying to do a good job for a mission that they believe in, and they get good at their job because they're there for so long. They get good at the skill, but they also get good at the politics of being part of an organization that answers directly to the White House. So there's kind of two different skill sets that you have to learn to survive and succeed at CIA. And neither of them has to do with being born smart. What's shocking is how many smart people go to CIA only to then be very disappointed in the first 2 or 3 years and then leave and go work for something that actually does challenge their intelligence, like SpaceX or Palantir, or the list goes on and on of all these major companies, Google and Facebook, that absorb CIA officers who leave CIA and move on to the commercial sector.
So you don't need to be brilliant to be in the CIA?
You don't. You need to be a number of other things, but brilliant's not one of them.
Interesting. And before the CIA trained you, you thought you were a good conversationalist. How would you train someone to be a terrible conversationalist?
Terrible conversationalists come naturally, and you see a lot of them. People who don't listen, and when I say listen, what I'm talking about is what's commonly called active listening, but active listening is sometimes hard for people to understand. So if we just talk about observable behaviors, when you're part of a conversation and you don't keep eye contact, when you're part of a conversation and you interrupt, when you're part of a conversation and you do other things during the conversation, you check your watch, you turn through pages, you check your phone, you get up and go into the kitchen and start making a sandwich. Like, these are all observable behaviors that demonstrate to the other person that you're not really engaged, you're not actively listening to the conversation. And because you are overwhelming your cognitive capability to listen and compute, you are actually bad at the conversation. You can't make a sandwich and listen to what a person has to say simultaneously. Your brain literally cannot do it. You might pick up most of the conversation, but not all of the conversation. And the person communicating to you actually literally knows every single bit of information that they shared with you. So when you come back after making a sandwich and sit down and you try to act cool and suave like you've been listening the whole time, they know you haven't. And what's difficult is a very skilled conversationalist in conversation with an unskilled conversationalist will immediately discredit you, discount you right then and there, and now they're just waiting for their chance to exit the conversation. This is how most marriage arguments happen and play out, because one person's trying to express themselves and the other person's only partially listening, and before the conversation is ever over, the person who's trying to express himself has already given up, because they see that you're distracted, you're being interrupted by the kids, you're checking your phone, you're checking your watch, you're getting up to pour yourself a glass of lemonade or whiskey or scotch, whatever it is. And the person seeking that validation is already quitting.
This reminds me a little bit about, I had Orion Taraban on. I don't know if you know him. He runs the YouTube channel Psych Hacks. And he told me that when a guy is speaking to another guy and you say something, if I repeat that back to you, you felt heard. But he said that when it's a male and female speaking and the female says something, it's not enough for the guy to just repeat it back. She wants you to feel how she feels. So is it different when you're having a conversation or trying to build trust or a relationship when it's a male versus a female?
The gender argument is a age-old argument, and there are certain instances where I have seen why gender stereotypes exist. But all of that to say, my fundamental training at CIA taught us to be blind to gender. Because gender, sex, sexual orientation, self-identification, whatever you want to call it, it all is individualized. And it's tied to an individual's cognitive perspective on themselves. So whether you're a male or a female, if you're an emotional creature, you want to have your emotions confirmed. If you're a logical creature, you want to have your logic confirmed. So when this person told you that a guy talking to a guy wants to hear you say the same thing back, it's because he's assuming that most men are logically oriented. There are plenty of men who are emotionally oriented. And if you try to logically adjust for an emotional man, you're going to fail. So you need to understand what they're actually wired for. You need to assess, determine, probe, and then reflect, mirror back. A perfect example of mirroring, as he was talking about, reflect back what they value, whether they value the emotion or whether they value the logic.
And you've said micro expressions and eye movements are a myth for reading people. What should you actually be watching?
There's a nuance here that I think is important to understand, right? So micro expressions that haven't been baselined and micro expressions that are done in an uncontrolled setting, those are not reliable. They exist. They're not fabrications. They're not a complete myth, but they're not something that become operationally useful because you don't know if that person's squinting because they're thinking or squinting because of the sun. You don't know if that person's touching their eyes because their eyes itch from hay fever or whether they're touching their eyes because they feel vulnerable in the conversation. So you have to have an awareness of the environment, what we call the atmospherics, whenever you make those decisions or make those assessments. So while the microexpressions and eye movements are not a full fabrication, you have to be aware of when and how to use them. So what you're really looking for in a controlled situation is you're looking for derivations away from a baseline. So if they blink a lot as their natural baseline, then you want to notice when they blink less. So just the idea of blink rate as a microexpression is a misnomer. Somebody might have a naturally high blink rate. They might have naturally dry eyes. They might have contact lenses. You never know. So you're always looking for the derivation from the baseline. When you look for that derivation, that's when microexpressions become useful if you're in a controlled setting. As soon as you're in an uncontrolled setting, outdoors with a stranger who you've never met before, now all of a sudden you can't rely on those microexpressions and eye movements because you never know whether or not that's just their baseline, that's just their temporary presence, their temporary behaviors, or whether there's some element of your presence that's affecting their expressions and their behavior. And that could be anything as simple as you appearing when they didn't expect you to appear. They're attracted to you. That changes their behaviors. They don't feel good. They had a bad lunch. You never know. So it's very difficult for professionals to assess and use those tools unless they have a baseline and a controlled environment.
And how long does it take you to build a baseline for someone you've just met?
So the baseline that we built for you didn't take very long, but it's also not a firm baseline, right? It's a relatively nascent assessment, so it takes time. We generally say that it takes between 3 and 6 hours of contact time before you have a confident baseline of a person. Now that might sound like a lot, but 3 or 6 hours of contact time with a person could be completed in just 2 or 3 meetings. It doesn't mean you have to engage them for 6 hours. I could sit at your house and watch you engage your wife and your kids for an hour, and that would count as an hour of baseline engagement, right? I could watch you at a business meeting and have an hour of time on target. I could watch you in a social setting where we go out with the boys to a bar for 2 or 3 hours, and boom, right there's 3 hours of assessment time.
There's a Mayim Bialik clip where in 4 minutes, without revealing a single thing about yourself, you learned she was divorced. Her son calls their bond an invisible string. She uses vegan protein. She said it felt like a man trying to get into her bed. What happens when you come across someone who knows what you're doing? Are there upgraded tactics that you would implement?
We call this spotting the spook. And when other trained operators, and that's what we're really looking for, is people who are trained. There are some people who are naturally gifted in these social situations. Some people who have learned how to behave this way through years of experience because of abuse or trauma or survival mechanisms, right? But when you're coming across someone who's actually trained, you can spot their training through the systematic application of the skills. So when it's spook versus spook, when you spot another spook, it's always fun because you both realize that you're seeing each other's systematic process. And there are certain tactics that you can use to try to divert, derail, probe, deflect what somebody is asking for or trying to do. For example, one of the key tools in elicitation is a tool called silence. And if you're just silent and you wait for someone to fill the silence, that's an elicitation tool. When two spooks are sitting across from each other, they're just quiet. And they're completely comfortable being quiet. And they won't break the silence until somebody acknowledges, I guess one of us is going to have to talk, right? And it's so different than when you come across somebody who's not trained to handle the silence. Because when somebody's not trained to handle the silence, you start to see their whole physical body break down. They start to get antsy, they start to move, they start to demonstrate their discomfort, and then they jump into a topic of conversation. And that's elicitation. That's the power of elicitation. And that's just one of many different tools. So a lot of times when it comes to spotting the spook, it's less about applying the tools surreptitiously and more about acknowledging that they're trained, respecting that they're trained, and then having a parallel conversation, another form of elicitation, but a parallel conversation that gives you similar information to what you would get from the primary conversation line, but you're running parallel to it. Almost like if you've ever avoided traffic by going on a side road that follows the highway, that's the same kind of a form of parallel conversation that we run.
Outside of when you were in the CIA, has it been spook to spook where you've met someone and you're like, I know this.
Yeah, it's happened more than a handful of times. When you're part of CIA, you meet a lot of your fellow peers, not just people at CIA, but people from other intelligence agencies that are both allies and enemies. And it's because you're hunting the same thing. There's only one or two really skilled North Korean nuclear scientists. So every fucking Western spy in the world is trying to find a way to meet that person. So when that person is going to show up in Singapore at some kind of convention, they're going to be surrounded by other Israeli spies and British spies and French spies and German spies, and you're all sitting there eating from the same shrimp dish.
Could any of these conversational tactics work on you, or you're too well trained and you're going to spot it right away?
It's important to always remember that there are people better than you. There are people more skilled than you. There are people more tenacious than you. There are people who just are more lucky than you. So I never assume that I am beyond reach, right? I never assume that I am the strongest or smartest person in the room. I try to assume at all times that I am the dumbest person in the room, and it's my chance to learn and my chance to listen. I am not necessarily afraid of coming across the person who can peel the onion for me, like peel my onion and find the core of me. I'm not afraid of that person, but I am constantly aware of the fact that any person I'm talking to is an opportunity for them to be that person. It makes me, if anything, a little bit more reclusive and careful with who I spend my time with. I say no more often than I say yes to public appearances, trips, media appearances, social gatherings, just because I find that my time to myself is far more valuable than it ever was in the past. But also, I don't want to take on the asymmetric risk of putting myself in a conversation with somebody that could leverage something against me.
Are there still things you know right now that people could be coming after you looking for, some specific information?
Absolutely. We all have information that makes us valuable, right? Whether it's gossip or whether it's a secret about a family member that another family member wants, we all have information that's valuable to somebody. Government secrets specifically that make you a target of collection by a foreign intelligence service, those age out over time. But some pieces of it, not to mention the fact of your reputation itself, never ages out, right? I've had several invitations to go to Ukraine. I've had invitations to go to Ukraine because the Ukrainian people want me to come out there and, cheer for their cause. I've had invitations to go out there because podcasters who are pro-Ukraine want to support Ukraine by taking multiple, media faces out there. I just had to say no to an invitation just a few weeks ago, a big diplomatic event that was inviting multiple kind of faces of media to come see what it looks like in Kiev right now. The risk for someone like me going out there is being apprehended by the Russians. Not because I have secrets to give the Russians, but just because the Russians would then be able to say that they have a former CIA officer in their custody. They can say anything they want to say after that, right? So just that title alone carries a certain level of risk. But then separate from all the government stuff, you've also got all the business stuff, right? We've had conversations before the camera ever turned on about 2 or 3 big names in LA that we're friends with. People want those phone numbers. People want those addresses. People want those personal email addresses. They want it for all sorts of nefarious and totally valid reasons. So the information you have is always something that people want.
You've said that you can't tell if someone is lying from eye movements. Are there other made up ideas here that make you laugh?
Yeah, there's a lot of them, right? So the whole premise of a human lie detector, by definition, is actually kind of funny. To think that you would ever be able to determine somebody else's veracity in a matter of seconds, minutes, on any given topic, like the whole exercise of 2 truths and a lie, these are utterly ridiculous things, just completely ludicrous ideas. The idea that you would know if someone's lying or not because of how fast, or if they're bouncing their foot, if they look up and to the left, if they touch their face, if they take too long to answer, if they stutter, if they blurt an answer out. These are not cognitively proven, vetted, empirical tools. These are wives' tales that probably creeped up in a list of other telltale signs at some point in time in the past that people have just chosen to pull out of context, right? Very similar to when someone pulls a verse out of the Bible out of context, or when somebody pulls a quote from you out of context and they apply it to the wrong thing. So are there instances where, rapid movement of a foot would indicate dishonesty? Yes. Are there instances where looking up and to the left would indicate dishonesty? Yes. But every instance, no. And to do it with a stranger in a moment is a pure sign of amateur behavior.
Are there shows or films that get it right?
So I'm going to answer this with kind of a funny story. So I hosted a show for Discovery Channel recently called Conspiracies and Cover-Ups. You'll find it on HBO Max. It's grown in popularity in the last few weeks. And one of the first people that I had as a guest was a mentalist from Las Vegas, right? Max Majors. Now, Max came out and spent 4 days with me, hypnotizing, manipulating, changing people. Real stuff, right? Actually taking them on from the whole beginning to end, from the moment that we met them all the way through Max's ability to vet them and demonstrate that they were susceptible to hypnosis, to then hypnotizing them and changing their behavior or implanting a thought or a behavior, and then triggering that thought and behavior. The problem is that full life cycle takes hours. And oftentimes the hours are accomplished over multiple days. So very few people have the curiosity, the tolerance, the professionalism to wait that long for the outcome that they desire. But professionals can do it. So professionals care. Professionals will master the entire cycle. So there are absolutely real tools out there, but none of them work as fast as the amateur wants them to work, right? Anybody who's ever been successful at anything understands that time and tenacity are the best contributors to long-term success.
Have you ever been in a situation where you felt the instinct to break your own rule?
Yes, and that's an instinct that CIA encourages us to listen for. The idea of patterns, routines, processes, systems it's a powerful thing, right? And it's the most powerful for people who are new It's the most powerful for people who are not yet professionalized. It's the most powerful for people who are struggling. Because when you don't have a better idea, it's best to fall back on the averagely good idea. But the more experience, the more confidence, the more success that you build over time, you develop whole new ways of innovating existing systems and processes. And when you're individualized in terms of your execution, you're the only person that can innovate new solutions for yourself. So CIA taught us that when it comes to processes for asset development, intelligence collection, secret keeping, follow the process when you don't have a better idea. And if you think you do have a better idea, test it, apply it, try it. Let empirical evidence tell you whether or not it's better or worse. But if you have no idea what to do, fall back on the existing process. It's such a powerful thing. They actually teach us this in even our daily routines, right? We have a daily routine that we're taught at the farm. When to wake up, when to eat, when to exercise, how to start for the day before you ever show up in the classroom. So they run us through this routine specifically to show us the benefit of following a routine, because all of us have different routines, if we even have a routine. And even at the farm, there are plenty of people who show up and they hit their alarm as late as they can, and then they throw water on their face and they rush off to class. So CIA teaches us to start this daily routine. And then about 2.5 weeks into it, they break our routine. Like, they tell us to break our routine, and they start to change class start times. And they'll change it late notice. So you have to break your routine. They'll change it and they'll announce it via email at 3 a.m. So you don't actually know when your class starts. So you have to set an alarm for 3:30 to wake yourself up in the middle of the night so you can check the email to see what time the class starts. And they do that because they want you to see the benefit of breaking your own routine. It's something that we call operationally a pattern of life. Patterns of life create efficiency, but patterns of life also create risk, because you become very predictable within your pattern of life. And that predictability not only benefits your adversaries, it also can inhibit your innovation, your creativity, and your ability to evolve.
Interesting. You use what is called SADRAT. If I'm not mistaken, you've built Everyday Spies' entire sales system around it. What is the most expensive step most businesses skip entirely?
Termination. The last step. SADRAT is an acronym that we use, SADRAT, spot, assess, develop, recruit, handle. I understand that's supposed to be an A, but this is a government acronym, so we use the A instead of the letter H, but recruit, handle, terminate. When you're creating spies, they always have a limited timeline of value. Generally speaking, that value lasts for 3 to 5 years for us. So if you create a secret generating spy today, on average, they're going to lose their value in 3 to 5 years. Either their information will no longer become valuable, or they'll get promoted out of the position they're in and into a position that's not useful anymore. Or they'll get caught, killed, put in prison, and you won't have your asset anymore. So on average, that comes out to about 3 to 5 years. So CIA has to have a process for how you end that relationship in a positive way, so that if they're promoted, 5 years later, they're going to get promoted again, and now they might be in a position of access again. And you want to be able to reapproach them and get them to start sharing secrets again. So the termination cycle, when you're talking about business specifically, the termination cycle is you have to know how to terminate all of those unfruitful leads. All of those people who spend a lot of time writing emails, asking questions, complaining, but don't actually buy anything else. And you want to find a way to focus your resources on the people who buy more at higher prices, who are stronger advocates. And the only way that you can take a limited number of resources and prioritize those resources is if you take back resources away from the least productive people. CIA follows something called an 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule dictates that any group of 100% is going to break naturally into two groups, a group of 80% and a group of 20%. When it comes to productivity, the most productive group will be the 20% group. The least productive group will be the 80% group. So CIA is always looking for ways to steal back resources from the 80% so that you can do a better job of meeting, debriefing, supporting, protecting the 20%. And I have seen the same thing to be true in business. 80% of my revenue comes from 20% of my customers. So what the fuck am I doing putting time into the other 80%? Right? And this is how we all need to start thinking about everything. Of 100% of the people you spend your time with, 20% lift you up, 80% hold you back. Why are you spending time with the 80%? Of the girls that you've dated, of the boys that you've dated, 20% had like real connection, 80% didn't. So it doesn't matter. When you're in the gym, 80% of your time in the gym is spent not making gains. 20% of your time in the gym is spent making real gains. So how do you constantly consolidate your resources to invest more into that 20% than in the 80%? And that's the T in SADRAT. That's what Terminate is all about. You cut those people off. You cut off support to those people. You stop answering those emails. You stop responding to those text messages. You stop putting money into sending ads to them. You drop them off your email list. You give up on certain forms of social media, because these are all resource pits. And if you just take the same resources and you put them into something more productive, you're going to be back in the development, the SAD part of SADRAT, right? The spot, assess, develop, creating new opportunity to identify more people who will live in the 20% so that you can continue to trim the 80%.
And it seems like this acronym doesn't just apply to business. It applies to life, right? It applies to your friendships. It applies to your time. You have people now all day sitting there on their phone, and that time could be better spent with their kids, with their family, with their significant other, with their friends, with building their business. It's not just a term for business.
Absolutely. And the reason I have been successful since leaving CIA isn't because of just what CIA taught me. CIA taught me how to be a good CIA officer. They taught me how to steal secrets that helped protect national security. If I would have stopped there, I would have been fucking useless in the real world, right? And this is the problem that most government employees have. They feel like they recognize that they're useless in the everyday world because they're a gunner on a ship. They're an accountant, for Homeland Security. They're an attorney that specializes in, constitutional law for such and such. We can't even imagine how we would take our skills and use them in the real world. And a CIA officer, an NSA officer, a DIA officer, an FBI agent, we all have the same problem. We're stuck in a government job because the skills that we have are only useful for one thing. When I left CIA, I was in the same place. And it wasn't until life got so fucking difficult that I had to actually use what CIA taught me in a corporate setting that it connected. And I realized, like these shortcuts, just like you just said, SADRAT works just as well in a boardroom as it does in a back alley. So what if I keep using it? And then I started seeing success. And then as my success corporately took off, and as my success as an employee took off, and as my success building a network of professionals took off, that's when it all clicked. I was like, I can do this for myself, or I can teach other people how to do this. And if I teach other people how to do this, I can actually make a sustainable business. I can create something that nobody else has created. I can innovate by taking existing things, existing CIA skills and existing digital infrastructure, and I can put them together and make something that's never been built before. And if I can build something that's never been built before, I don't even have to be good at it, because the first person to market steals the majority of the market share. So it was all upside to me, right? But then again, I'm also somebody who rushes into risks.
You mentioned there was a difficult part there, and I'm guessing, when people leave, let's say a government job or any job, and they're going to go out on their own, it's not easy. And, tell me about that difficult time. There's
a lot that nobody talks about when it comes to leaving a government organization, especially an organization like CIA. CIA is glorified in media. It's come into more scrutiny since the first Trump administration. But prior to 2016, movies, TV shows, books were made about CIA. Everybody loved the mystery. Even since 2016, people still love the mystery. There's still spy movies that come out. There's another James Bond coming out. There's always something about espionage, right? Hell, the Star Wars franchise made an entire show about espionage. The human mind, the American mind especially, is obsessed with this idea of secrets and secrecy, and CIA is what comes to mind when you think of secrets and secrecy. But that culture is an insidious, poisonous, self-destructive culture. Because inside the agency, not only does everybody come in with these aggrandized thoughts from what they knew or what they thought they knew from media, but now you're actually accepted, you're brought into the fold, you're part of the cadre, and you really get access to secrets. And, like I mentioned earlier, everybody on the inside is a master manipulator and a master liar. So all the politics in that workplace are based off of leverage and secrets. So you never really have a real friend, you never really have a real mentor, you never really know who you can trust because everybody's using everybody else against each other, building their little fiefdoms and twisting words and twisting official statements so that they can get a little bit more money or a little bit better opportunity or a sexier case. And when you exist in that environment professionally, and you only ever leave that environment to go into the real world and operate, where you lie and steal and manipulate, your entire 16-hour waking day is just different varieties of lying. And year after year of that, it really starts to tear you down. And there are major alcohol issues at CIA. There's drug abuse issues at CIA. There's adultery issues at CIA. That's how a CIA officer becomes a spy for a foreign country. And how many times have you seen that happen, right? It's a very insidious culture. But strangely, when it comes time to leave, you feel guilty about leaving it behind. You feel like you were built to do one thing, and all of America's national security rests on the shoulders of just a few, and now you are putting your burden on everybody else so that you can go be just an innocent, peon, just another American citizen who outsources your security to other people. That's how we think about it. And when you're on the outside and then you start making more money than you ever made on the inside, especially if you're like me and you're capitalizing on your experience from the inside, then the whole office turns against you. And now they say that you're a sellout, and now they say that you're capitalizing on skills that aren't yours, and now you're taking advantage of the name of CIA to build yourself up. And not everybody believes that, but the few 20% that come out and actually say something about it, it hurts. And it hurts when, you still have friends on the inside and your friends come under attack because they're friends with you. It's a terrible, childish high school type of drama, but that exists. And it doesn't just exist at CIA, it exists at FBI and NSA and in the military and everywhere else. And it's something that nobody talks about outside of their own community, because we're also still trying to protect and preserve the honor of being in uniform, the honor of being in clandestine service, the honor of being in a government service position. But in reality, the best of the best are not on the inside very often. It's who's left from the rest that stays on the inside.
And you talked about loyalty, right? You talked about you wanted someone to be loyal to, and for 7 years that was the CIA. And then when you leave, I assume now that's your family.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to find out who that's going to be. And it's really difficult to recognize that you aren't good at assigning loyalty. And it's especially hard when you realize inside CIA that you've given your loyalty to an organization only to then realize that the organization is not loyal back to you. And I think this was one of the benefits. I had two major benefits that most peers don't have. I was married to another CIA officer who was also part of the National Clandestine Service, so also undercover like me. So my wife and I met, dated, married, and had our first child, all while undercover with CIA. So we got to go through the entire maturity process professionally together, from recruitment and ego building all the way through to 3 or 4 tours and medals and successes and all that other stuff. And what we both came to realize towards the end of our career is that insidious culture I was telling you about, that CIA doesn't actually know how to lead its own people. It doesn't actually know how to develop people of capability and confidence. It only knows how to lie, leverage, and manipulate. So when you realize that your entire future, the whole future of your career is going to continually be this manipulation and leverage process, you come to a very stark decision. Am I going to gamble my own future on doing more of this? Or am I going to start over? And for us, with a 1-year-old, 34 years old, starting over was the choice that we made.
Makes sense. And it seems like you made a good decision there. Okay, so after that 7 years in the CIA, what are maybe the 4 things that you think control every human being?
It's a very good question. And I would break it into 2 different groups. There's the 4 things that actually control an untrained human being, right? Somebody who's completely blind and oblivious that they're being controlled. I would say there's 4 things that control that person. And then there's 4 things that control a primal person, right? We're all primal people at our core, but you have to get through a lot of convenience before you get to a primal person. So I would argue that if we look at the things that control us as kind of spoiled Americans, if we can look at those 4 things first, it's going to be more useful, because only when these conveniences are all stripped away will we get to a primal person. CIA spends a lot of time dealing with primal people, because outside of the United States, most human beings are just trying to survive. Inside the United States is the only place where we're as distracted as we are with whether or not our mother-in-law is going to say something embarrassing at the dinner table on Thanksgiving, or whether or not our boss is going to ask us to work late on the weekend. In the rest of the world, they don't know where the next meal's coming from. They don't know if their kids are coming home from school. People still have huge families in other parts of the world because they expect their children to die. If you go to Vietnam, it's an incredible experience, in large part because you see children, what my wife and I call children raising children. You will see an 11-year-old driving a scooter with a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old right behind her, and the 7-year-old holding the 3-year-old and holding the dress or the shoulders of the 11-year-old who's standing on the front of the scooter, driving it in major traffic to take them to and from the store or to and from school, right? And one accident of the 11-year-old, one mistake on the 11-year-old's part kills all 3 of them. And that's not the only child driving, not to mention the children who are just walking across the street and the children, whatever else. And none of that has to do with like the drunken 90-year-old guy that can't see, who's driving an oversized truck with 3 split hogs in the back, and nobody's following traffic laws. Like, it's an incredible thing. That's the rest of the world. That's India, that's Southeast Asia, that's Latin America, that's parts of developing Europe. So much of the world is primal, but here in the United States, we're not. Here we have other things, right? Emotions drive Americans. Those emotions can be triggered by anything from social media and politics all the way down to religion and family values, right? Relationships drive Americans. People that we think we need to listen to, people we think we need to impress, people that we feel loyal to, people that abuse us. There's a sense where we are driven by, I guess the best word is pressure. And that pressure can be pressure to create more, pressure to make more, pressure to be more. And that pressure can come from inside ourselves or from outside of ourselves. And then we're also driven by time. We feel like we have to make the most of the time that we have. So we rush. We rush to the place where we make ourselves shitty meals because we're trying to make a meal in as little time as possible for dinner, right? And we all fall victim to this, where we've made a number of bad decisions in the day and now it's dinner time and we're just gonna make a bowl of cereal. These are the things that drive us, right? Our emotions, our relationships, the pressure that we put on ourselves, the pressure that other people put on us, and the sense of time that's totally perverted because our perspective is lost, right? We live in this envelope of American idealism. And because of that, we're so far removed from our primal creatures. And these 4 things affect everything. They affect our relationships with our loved ones. They affect our relationships with ourselves, our mental health, our physical health, and we just keep being slave to them.
And what are the 4 primal drivers of every person?
So safety is a major primal driver, like survivalism, if you will, right? Just literally making it through to the next day. Food, what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, and making sure that it's something that you can consume. Shelter, and some kind of community. If you have food, shelter, safety, and community, your primal needs are met. We all have that. And for that reason, we let ourselves get distracted by things that are higher up on Maslow's hierarchy. But if we were to stop and realize that we could go all the way back and change those same primal needs, right? Just think about what would happen if you changed your form of shelter. And you can apply shelter to a number of things. Yes, your home, but also your city, your state, the school that your kids are in, the office that you're in. These are all forms of shelter. And how much better would the rest of your life get if you changed something about that primal need? Chose a different state where you might want to be, chose a different job that you might enjoy doing or that challenged you, right? Food. Changing what you eat literally changes your life in a matter of hours. It changes how your gut feels, it changes your gut health, it changes your focus, it changes your level of sleep and rest. It transforms everything. Community. The people who are around you literally determine your future success and trajectory. So we're distracted by these things that don't actually matter. You can try as hard as you want to change the pressure in your life, and it's not going to make an outsized change in your success. You need to change the primal elements, not the superficial elements.
What's something you've said in an interview or podcast that you think differently about today?
A lot. So many of my podcast interviews, we became about current events. And I can appreciate that. My business and my success has paralleled some of the most contentious moments in American history, not just recent American history, but the last 30 years, right? The invasion of Ukraine, the attack on Iran, the kidnapping of Maduro, the first Iran-Israel war, the second Iran-Israel war, like the bombing of Gaza. All of this has happened in just a few short years. And during that time was the same time that I was growing in terms of my media awareness. So there are many things that I feel differently about because context has changed. I very much remember in 2022 talking about how Russia was going to beat Ukraine by going into some of the southern cities, Odessa specifically, on the coast of the Black Sea. 3 months later, there was a massive counterattack from the Ukrainians that was backed by the Americans. Nobody could see a counterattack like that coming. Nevertheless, as we sit here today in 2026, there is still no success from either side in terms of a clear victory. And Russia hasn't lost more than 3% of ground. So do I still believe that Russia is in the best position to win that conflict? Absolutely. But of course, there's millions of people now out there who focus on the fact that I said it was going to happen through Odessa by a certain date, completely missing the fact that there was a major change in the battlefield that came from an ally supporting a surprise attack. That's just one example of how all of this works. There's also, there's points in time where I've tried to tell people through podcast interviews that certain people are worth your time and certain people aren't. That's not a message the average person likes to hear. We just talked today about the 80-20 rule, right? If you really listen to what I taught about the 80-20 rule, what I'm saying is that of 100% of all the people in your life, 80% are a waste of your time. There's lots of people who don't like hearing that lesson. So I wish I could go back and change a little bit about how I said that. There's a part of me that feels like I should change the way I said that. But then there's another part of me that feels like the truth is the truth and you have to deal with it. And if you're somebody who gets upset when you hear that you're not worth my time, that's not something that should offend me. That's something that you can change, because we all have the ability to make ourselves more valuable, more productive, more profitable than we are right now. And if you want to be part of someone else's 20%, you can earn it. But was it the right time to say that when I was still starting out? Was it the right time to turn people off right out of the gates before they ever even, got a chance to know me? One of the things I'm very proud of to this day still is that if you do a Google search for Andrew Bustamante scam, there's no result, right? Nobody has ever accused me of being a scam artist. They've accused me of all sorts of other stuff, but they've never accused me of being a scam artist. And when you're a media personality, that's a big win.
You've said the CIA is morally ambivalent about how it executes operations. Give me the most morally gray thing a CIA officer does as a matter of routine.
As a matter of routine. So I'm going to answer your question, but then I also want to make sure you understand that what we do on a routine basis isn't that impressive. It's what we do in extreme situations that becomes surprising, right? We routinely lie to loved ones. We routinely redirect funds. We routinely cover up what actually happened in the field by creatively adjusting something that happens in an official document, right? These are all things that happen routinely. And these are all morally, what we call morally flexible. All right.
Morally flexible.
Moral ambivalence is another good word for that, right? But it's a moral flexibility because you're always trying to keep to the spirit of the operation. And the spirit of the operation sometimes needs a little bit of help, right? Which is very different than what you see in the kind of traditional mainstream world. But some of those things might be surprising, they might be disappointing, but everybody can, I think, understand a little bit of what it's like to massage a report, change a small detail so it doesn't make the boss too worried. We've all done this stuff like this, right? The really interesting moral flexible stuff, morally ambivalent stuff that happens at CIA is when we find access to a secret that we think is so valuable that we're willing to do things that nobody would have ever thought we were willing to do, right? Support a pedophile in their efforts to do something else, in their efforts to pursue their own desires, but they also have access to something that we really need. And there's ways that we can do that. And there's ways that we can do that that are completely legal, right? Because, for example, the German intelligence service in Germany, they see pedophilia completely differently than we do. All of Europe sees sexuality completely differently than we see it in the United States. So we might be able to have a German B&D officer actually provide confiscated pornography from another operation to a target. So we didn't create it. We didn't make it happen. We didn't do anything except confiscate it. And now we're actually tracking and auditing its location by giving it to somebody else in exchange for secrets that keep the West safe. Gold bars. There's a CIA officer who was just caught with $40 million in gold bars. How the fuck does that happen? That's a shocking thing, right? Not if you're inside. It's not actually that shocking.
That's common?
It's not common. This is what I'm telling you. This is the difference between routine and actual moral flexibility, right? Because you don't get $40 million. You don't get 40 million worth of gold bars overnight. What happens is you ask for 4 gold bars multiple times, and they're given to you multiple times, and you store them in some sort of shed or garage or whatever else. It takes time to do that kind of thing. Well, why does that happen? Because there are lots of cases around the world where people want to exchange secrets, but they don't want to do it for dollars. They want to do it for some other kind of currency. And in the last 10 years, gold has become an extremely valuable resource, and it's the most reliable of all currencies over euros or yen or renminbi. So when more people are asking for their payment in gold, it makes sense for case officers to be stockpiling gold so that they can carry gold whenever they have to go to a meeting. But enough of that turns into $40 million worth of gold in someone's garage. 2 years ago, that 40 million that's in his garage was only worth 10 million, right? So back then, maybe it wasn't as scary as it is now. But regardless of the fact, the point is, whether we're paying people in confiscated pornography or whether we're paying people in gold bars or whether we're paying people in Johnny Walker Black, right? We will do whatever we have to do to get secrets that protect American lives.
Was there ever a direct order that you couldn't execute?
No. I mean, there were plenty of orders I didn't want to execute, and there's plenty of orders that I thought weren't right, morally right, ethically right, strategically right, but that's not what we're paid to do, right? We're paid to go and do what we're told. Another kind of, because it's a world of lies and misdirection, there are many times where an officer gets a direct order, they leave to go execute the order, never actually execute the order, and then come back and make a formal statement that it was executed. And that's just the way it works. That is the world of intelligence, right? That's what makes it so different than the world of military or law enforcement. Law enforcement has become more of we say it happened just even though it didn't happen. But the military is still very strictly accurate and reality based, unless somebody leaves a comment that says otherwise.
Is there a time where an order is given and that officer says, you know what, I don't think this is morally right. Maybe I'll go act like I did it, act like it I tried to do it. I couldn't complete it, come back, make a report, and kind of just said, I'm going to kind of put a line in the sand here on some things?
So yes, that happens, but it's, you make it sound like it's a moral high ground. It's not always a moral high ground. It's not always like an officer says, hey, you need to go execute this thing. And then the officer is like, oh, that's a morally repugnant thing that you want me to do, right? You want me to go kill a pregnant lady, right? Most of the time, what they're doing is they're protecting their career. Most of the time, it's a senior officer says, go execute XYZ, but that officer that they're giving the order to already knows that the senior officer is not in good favor with somebody else. So they'll pay lip service, they'll go, they'll say it's done, it's not actually done, because what they're really doing is trying to maintain their, what's called a rabbi or a godfather. They're trying to maintain the relationship with some other officer who they believe will help them in the future.
So it's really just back down to incentives, and even in the CIA, it's maybe power and position or money.
And this is an important thing to understand, because we're talking about the distinct difference between the CIA that you read about and that you see in the movies versus the real CIA. And if you look back in the last few years of the real CIA, you saw a mass exodus from 2018 to 2020, right? The estimated average loss was one undercover officer a day for 2 straight years. The publicly available number is that there's only 10,000 undercover officers at CIA. So for 2 straight years, if we were really losing one a day, you're talking about losing nearly 700 trained undercover officers just from 2018 to 2020. And it's now 2026, right? How many more continued to leave? And then when you had the change of administration from Donald Trump to Joe Biden, the Biden administration came in with a whole huge hiring surge. And if you recall, that hiring surge had nothing to do with trying to hire people who were pro-America, like experienced government operators, none of that. They were looking for LGBTQ and people who were non-traditional. So there were ads out for people with handicaps, and there were ads out for people who self-identified as a different gender. And the whole woke culture really set in because as presidents change, their government policies change. Their government policies are first and foremost enacted in the hiring of government employees. So you had a huge exodus of skilled people from 2018 to 2020, and then you didn't have any hiring effort to hire skilled people. You had a hiring effort to hire people that had a political goal behind them. And then Donald Trump came right back into office again in 2024. And then what happened, right? And CIA is getting lots of credit for very successful operations, whether it's Iran or whether it's Venezuela. I'm hoping that CIA really did do those things. But the benefit of the president controlling CIA is that he can say CIA did anything, and CIA will never disagree. It could have been the military, it could have been the Israelis, it could have been, a joint force between the US Army and the Mexican Army. And they'll give credit to CIA because it obfuscates who actually carried out the operation. So is the CIA that we're reading about now the same CIA that's capable and efficient, or is it just a title that's being used to kind of obfuscate the truth? I don't know, but when you look at the last 7 years of history at CIA, it paints a different picture.
You've said intelligence agencies operate under the assumption that at any given moment, there are 2 active penetrations inside every major agency. So if the CIA had a mole right now, how does an institution function when it already knows it's been penetrated?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the rule of thumb that we have is if you haven't found a mole, you assume there's 2. If you have found a mole, you suspect there's 5. Because in order for a mole to have been discovered, it means that you found them despite the fact that they were hidden, which means that it took you this long to find them. You're much less prepared than you thought you were, so you have to assume that you're even further penetrated than you actually are. But you're always assuming that you're penetrated at some level. How do they function? They function the way that they're built to function, and they're built to function through compartmentalization. So within a government organization, let's just take CIA as an example. CIA has multiple departments that cover different geographical areas of the world. So if you're part of geographical area South America, you're not going to know what's happening in geographical area East Asia. And if you're part of East Asia, you're not going to have idea of what's going on in North America, right? So you got all these different verticals that are compartmented, meaning your login credentials that take you into the actual computer system do not grant you access to anything from that other geographical region. There's also horizontal compartmentalization. So if you are part of the Mexico team, you don't get to see what's happening at the highest levels with the Argentina team. And if you're part of the Singapore team, you don't get to see what's happening at the highest levels of the Malaysia team. So you've got this horizontal compartmentation on top of this vertical compartmentation, which makes it so that you really only have a block of information. Now, as officers go through their career, they move from block to block. So they'll be in different positions of access, which means that any one person will have kind of compiled information from multiple locations. But the assumption is no person can remember all the secrets. So the actual database has to protect the secrets, and what they track is a person's credentials and what they've had access to. So that process of cross compartmentation, along with a complete retrievable audit system, is the only way that they have found to handle an organization that you know is going to be penetrated. Because if it's penetrated, you can find the person who's penetrating it, because you can find the person who's behaving in a way that they shouldn't be behaving, a person on the Singapore desk trying to get information on Mexico, and a person who just came from Mexico who's now on Singapore trying to get information on Mexico. That's outside of the norm. So the system will highlight these people, and then we have internal investigative teams that will research these people, and we have, of course, you sign all of your privacy rights away, so everything is available to them to surveil, to explore, to collect, so that they can build a case on you if they need to. And most of those cases are something that gets built and prosecuted very quickly and quietly, because they don't want the American people to understand if and how much they've been penetrated.
It seems like that's an environment where it's really hard to trust people.
I mean, if there's anything that we've been able to talk about today, it's how difficult that culture is for trust and honesty, which is just a fascinating thing, because national security is heavily contingent on the truth that CIA can produce. And I'm not here to say that, I'm not trying to trash talk CIA. I'm just trying to tell the truth of what the culture was like there, might still be like there. I don't know. But when you're in an organization that is that focused and professional when it comes to dishonesty, it becomes its own kind of undoing.
Mossad is known for hunting people down anywhere in the world. Is there anyone on this planet they actually can't get?
So it's not just Mossad that has that kind of reach. When it comes to any kind of government-backed intelligence service, there's nobody who's outside of reach. It's just a matter of how much time and how you can execute to maximize operational success, but also plausible deniability, right? Because it's very hard to hide who was the power, who was the hand behind it all. You know what I mean? When you look at like the Maduro raid, it's very clear exactly who did that, who ordered that, who executed that. So they gave up plausible deniability in exchange for operational capacity. But you can understand how if there was more of a need for operational deniability or for plausible deniability, the operation would have looked very different. So Mossad is the organization that gets the most credit. And it's largely because they have the fastest pace of operations, because they have existential threats basically surrounding them, right? Iran wants them off the map. Iran has put proxies all around Israel, physically around Israel, that are also trying to eradicate, not just kill a few Israelis, they're trying to eradicate the existence of Jews, right? They want to completely destroy them. That's a true existential threat. In response to that existential threat, that's why you see Mossad so willing and capable to carry out operations that they carry out. That type of existential threat doesn't exist for France. So you don't see the French coming up with the same kind of operation. Could they if they needed to? Yes. But they don't need to, so they don't ever push themselves to that point of losing their plausible deniability in order for operational capacity. The United States, we are of course capable of doing that. That's what we showed with the killing of Ayatollah Khomeini, right? Don't forget also that Russia is very capable of this themselves, and you saw that with the killing of Prigozhin in 2022. So intelligence agencies, if you if you reach the place where you have earned their attention, they can do whatever they want to you.
What do you think is going to happen with the war with Iran? What's the most likely outcome?
The most likely outcome is that it's going to turn into some sort of awkward, bloated ceasefire, this strange, not really a war, not really peace situation, because the United States misstepped. The Donald Trump administration made a major mistake when they supported Israel in the attack on Iran. And even the stated limited objectives that they were trying to achieve have not been met. So somehow this backwater country that was an imminent threat to the United States, right? An imminent existential threat. If you listen to the Department of War and Pete Hegseth, that's the level that Iran was. Days away from a nuclear device that was going to destroy all of the United States. That's what an existential threat means, right? If that was really the case, the United States went in there and in 72 hours completely obliterated their Navy and 90% of their missile capacity, right, in a week. And yet here we are now, 3 months into it, and there's still an Ayatollah in control. The Ayatollah is still named Khomeini, right? There's the global price of oil is higher than it's ever been. People are worried about the Straits of Hormuz. This backwater country has somehow still been able to shoot down Apache helicopters and shoot down modern day fighter jets from the United States. This is not the kind of thing that's going to end quickly, and it's certainly not the kind of thing where Iran is going to let themselves be portrayed as weak. But the United States also doesn't want to let itself be portrayed as weak. But neither side is really willing to escalate to the level that they would need to escalate to actually define a true winner. So their whole goal is going to be to replicate what's happening between Russia and Ukraine, right? Just let the headlines get taken over by something else so people forget that it happened at all. It wasn't that long ago when every headline in every paper every day was about Russia and Ukraine. Now people don't even think about it.
I was talking to a friend about that, and I was like, do most Americans realize that war is still happening? Because like you said, it was in the media every single day. Then it slowly just faded, and it's not in the media anymore. And now the war with Iran is in the media every single day, or has been. And I'm guessing in some short period of time, that's going to fade away. Something else is going to happen.
Exactly.
And there's still going to be some type of conflict. We may have a deal on paper, but who knows, right?
Exactly. And I think that's what we're seeing prepped right now with Cuba. As soon as there can be some kind of victory in Cuba, whether it's a quick military attack in Cuba, whether it's a diplomatic deal in Cuba, whether it's the willing, arrest or turnover of Raul Castro. Once Cuba can make headlines, all this Iran stuff is going to get forgotten about too. And that is how our current government, how our current administration has understood the news cycle to work, and they're not wrong. And especially when you see how the Trump administration has shaped the news cycle. I don't mean controlling the media, I mean controlling access to what's actually happening, right? They put limitations on who's allowed to be part of the White House press team. They've blocked certain periodicals and legacy news agencies completely out of the loop. So it's a whole different world of narrative and messaging control now than it has been in the past.
Okay, let's go back to when you were in the CIA. You're the version of yourself that can read a room in 4 minutes. Take me to the first time you tried it in real life and maybe it fell apart. Did it ever fall apart, or were you on it from the very beginning?
This is another misnomer that, people seem to think that you can land on a fact, or that CIA officers are able to determine facts in a very short period of time. We don't determine facts. We create assessments. We collect enough data to make a high probability assessment, recognizing that it may not be accurate. There have been plenty of times where I've been in a room and I've assessed the people in the room and been dead wrong about the majority of them. And there's other moments where I've assessed everybody in a room and I've convinced myself it can't be this easy. And I keep waiting to be wrong and waiting to be wrong, and it turns out that I'm not wrong, right? It happens both ways all the time, but the big learning point is that nobody can land on a fact, an unequivocal fact, in 4 minutes. The best you can do is come up with an assessment that's backed by objective observables.
You said the CIA recruits people who are a little damaged and then keeps them loyal using the exact same motivators it teaches them to use on others. So the CIA runs the Rice framework, if I'm not mistaken, right, on its own people. Did you realize that while it was happening?
No, you don't realize that until years after you start. One of the things that CIA does really well, not only does it recruit the right people, but then it keeps those people in what we call an echo chamber that positively reinforces the areas that are most needed by that officer. So if you need to be told that you're smart, you end up in an echo chamber that people keep telling you that you're smart. If you need to be told that you're powerful, you end up in an echo chamber where you're powerful, right? If you're, and it's not even real, right? I remember, just as an example, I had a good friend of mine who was an analyst for the country of Burma. So he spoke the same language that they speak in Myanmar, in Burma. And nobody speaks that language, but he did. And he was an analyst in there. And nobody was interested in Burma, right? 2007, 2008, there's no interest in Myanmar really at all. There's all sorts of human rights abuses that are happening there. There's a junta in charge. The vast majority of people hearing me tell you this story right now don't even know where the fuck Myanmar or Burma is, right? But that was his baby. So the echo chamber that they put him in is that he just kept being told how good he was, how useful he was, how talented it was, and how he was changing the future of this one country, right? Well, he believed that. He truly believed that. And then one day, Burma became actually interesting because it had a conflict with Thailand. Well, now all of a sudden, the president is interested in Burma, but the analyst isn't talking to the president. The analyst is talking to his boss, who's talking to his boss, who's talking to his boss, who's talking to the president. So the analyst is like, I'm the smartest guy in the room on this. Like, you guys have been telling me for years, like, I've been waiting for this chance. And in the movies, that's how it works. In the movies, it's like, oh, you're the smartest guy. I got to take you to the White House. That's not how it works in real life. There's a whole food chain above you, right? So this idea that CIA has hired the best and most powerful and most independent people is just fundamentally flawed, because their strength is in being able to take somebody who's fundamentally flawed and then use that flaw systematically to create the most optimized government service possible.
Do you think this is the same mechanism that great companies use maybe to keep their best people?
I don't think so. And the reason I say I don't think so is because I don't think companies have put the money, the time, the effort into creating the system that will continually, perpetually abuse individuals. What's also interesting is that the laws that protect you as a civilian don't exist when you're a government servant. So if your organization was systematically abusing you because of your own self-doubt or because of your abusive childhood trauma from your father or whatever else, you could sue your CEO. There's no suing the FBI when the FBI is, taking advantage of your need for external validation.
In Shadow Cell, you describe facilitating the supply of illegal materials to informants inside terrorist networks. How does the CIA justify that?
The same way that we justify every other operation. If you give a little bit of money to a terrorist group that saves American lives, that's money well spent. So if you support a terrorist cell that's planning an attack in Pakistan, what do you care, right? If you find out that that same terrorist cell is going to be used against the United States, it's a different story. This might sound surprising, but just look at history. What was the Mujahideen? What was Osama bin Laden before he was America's most wanted? He was the leader of a group rebelling against the Russians, and they were being provided with weapons and intelligence by the Americans. So the very same weapons that we gave the Mujahideen became the same weapons that were shooting down American warriors between 2001 and 2021. So this is a very public cycle that we know exists, but for some reason, it's always a surprise when we discover it again.
The CIA recruited you specifically because you had already learned to live without trust. What did 7 years of professional deception add to a person wired that way from the beginning?
That's another really good question. So I think the best way to answer that is not to think of what was added, as much as what was stripped away. When you don't trust other people, that's not a reductive thing, right? It's not like you simplify your life by trusting nobody. Instead, it's a very complicated thing. You add all these barriers into your life. You add challenges so it makes it harder for people to get close to you, and you add habits that make it harder for people to connect with you, and you do things that distance yourself from other people. So so that distrust becomes an additive element. Everything that you add to your life consumes resources, it consumes energy, it consumes time, it consumes money. So rejecting anybody who wants to be your friend consumes your energy. And blocking yourself from social media and blocking yourself and hiding your address, that all consumes money. And not to mention the time that's lost, right? So when you have all that distrust, it's very additive. 7 years at CIA showed me that you don't have to actively distrust everybody. You can simplify your life a whole hell of a lot more if you simply make it so that people have to prove that they are trustworthy. So instead of keeping everyone away, you just let a few in, right? And when you do that, it completely transforms your relationship with energy, or your relationship with resources, because you have energy, you have money, and you have time that you never used to have. You can go out in public and you can walk around and you can just ignore everybody instead of going out and walking around and having to observe everybody because you're afraid of who's going to approach you. It completely changes your relationship with anxiety. It changes your relationship with depression. It changes the way you view the world around you when you realize that distrust is additive and it's all consuming, but waiting to prove trust is reductive, and it simplifies things.
You got married while actively hunting terrorists. What did that wedding look like?
It was small. It was remote. It was invite only. My own mother didn't come to my wedding because my wife and I wanted a tightly controlled destination wedding on our terms in our way. So for that, our invitations were very few, and our invitations were really only to family. And inside those invitations, we told them, like, this is when you arrive, this is when you depart, this is where you're staying, this is who can come, this is who can't come. And some of our family didn't like that process, my mom being one of them.
What's something no one has asked you that you desperately wanted to answer?
I don't know that I desperately want to answer anything. The truth is that I don't really want to be a face and a voice on the internet. And I'm going through the process as much as I can, as quickly as I can, of pulling myself out of my own company so that I don't have to be the one under the lights in front of the camera talking to the mic. I'm a private person. I've always been a private person. It's what led me to CIA. The problem is I also feel like there is nobody else out there stepping under the light, in front of the camera, in front of the mic, to tell the truth. There's plenty of people coming out to tell stories, and there's plenty of people coming out to talk about how great they are, and there's plenty of people coming out to talk about how broken the government is. But none of that is what's valuable to me about my time at CIA. What's valuable is the skills and how the skills help individuals. And for whatever reason, people just aren't talking about that. So I feel a bit of a moral obligation to come out and talk about it. And I, of course, feel a financial incentive to come out and talk about it. Because if I can teach something that nobody else is teaching, that's a business, that's a lifestyle, and that funds my own plans to hide away in a cabin, someday, and it funds my children's education, and it funds my retirement account, and it funds, my poodle's haircut every 6 weeks.
Let's talk about the US, right? What is the single greatest vulnerability that the US has that most people don't see?
We don't trust each other. Not only do we not trust each other, we actively are aggressive towards each other. Recent polling shows that 40% of Americans don't believe that the other 60% of Americans even believe in democracy, right? And that goes on both sides. We live in a country right now that's divided along artificial political lines. The extremely blue distrust the extremely red, and the extremely red distrust the extremely blue. They distrust each other so much that they would rather have one party in charge of the entire country their party. As soon as we become a one-party country, we're not a democracy anymore. As soon as we become a one-party country, we're that much closer to socialism. We're that much closer to despotism. We're that much closer to being everything that we fought against from the time of the American Revolution. So it's ridiculous, and people don't see it. They don't recognize that our biggest vulnerability is how much energy, how much money, how much time we put into hating each other, and how much that helps every one of our adversaries.
And the media feeds on that. I mean, what do you, in your opinion, what can be done, right, to change the trajectory of its being so
I don't think it
polarized?
Can be changed.
You don't think so?
I don't think it can be changed, and it's a very sad thing to say, right? So I've been saying it for years. The United States is destined for at least a full generation, a full 10 years of pain, of decline, of difficulty. And whether that 10 years started 2 years ago, not related to the Donald Trump administration really at all, whether it started 2 years ago or whether it has yet to start in another year, you can argue. But when you look at inflation, when you look at unemployment, when you look at our loss of global stature, when you look at our inability to keep not only our own people safe, but foreign countries that have always relied on us, no longer relying on us, when you watch how we've lost allies in Europe, we've somehow gained allies that were invading forces of other countries, you can see how everything is in turmoil right now. The media has less access than they used to. There's less checks and balances. The head of the country's National Intelligence Directorate, the DNI, has no history in intelligence and comes from a history in real estate. That's the world we live in now. If that isn't a sign that things are going to get worse before they get better, I don't know what is. And that's the fact. That's just the reality. If you haven't been taking steps to prepare for a decade of difficulty, start taking steps now. If you are unprepared for a decade of difficulty, you're fucked. Nobody is going to help you. No government organization is going to help you. No neighbor is going to help you. No family member is going to help you. You are doomed. And the entire system has always been created so that some people will be beyond help, but they will be kind of consumed and ground up so that their losses make up enough float for the top 5% that the overall country thrives. And this is exactly what you're seeing when you watch inflation go up, jobs stagnate or go down, and the average value of the dollar drop. You're watching all of this happen at the same time that you're watching the stock market climb. How does that happen? It happens because that's how our system was built. Our system has always been built that way. The difference is we never had a president in power that was so willing to actively leverage that system. All the presidents in the past sparingly or selectively used it, including Barack Obama and Joe Biden. They sometimes tried to stimulate the economy. They sometimes tried to, flex diplomacy. They sometimes used covert action. Every one of those tools has an effect on the average American's everyday life. The difference is that Donald Trump came into office knowing that, has surrounded himself by advisors that are very fluent in the financial markets. So if there's anything Donald Trump knows how to do, he knows how to make the economy climb. Whether or not that's real growth or whether that's exponential growth for a few, is irrelevant. Growth looks like growth, but only a few people are going to benefit from that growth. And following the Donald Trump administration, we will find out whether Americans care enough to actually try to right the wrong and put another moderate president in power, or whether they're going to flip to an extreme blue like they did when they flipped to Biden, or whether they're going to stay in an extreme red like they're preparing for most likely with J.D. Vance. But the reality is any extreme flip is just going to fuck us more. We need to find our way back to something moderate because we need to fix the problem that we created. Not Donald Trump, not Joe Biden, not Barack Obama. We ourselves as an American group, we have let ourselves fall victim to populist politics. where we vote for people because of what they say, the color of their skin, and what we understand of their narrative story, rather than hiring people for the job that are committed public servants, which is what we always used to do.
Yeah, so you think wealth inequality is going to continue, and that's going to lead to the people that have more having much more, the people that have less having much less, and that is going to lead to some unrest.
And that's already happening. That's been happening. If you just look at the COVID years are formally documented as being from 2021 to 2023. During this global pandemic, the stock market was going up, the wealthy were getting wealthier, and the poor and the poorest were dying. That has nothing to do with politics. That has everything to do with a stark light on our system. Like, this is the way we work. This is the way we were built to work. Don't forget that the United States was a country not built on freedom and equality. It was built so that white landowning men could vote for the future of a country that protected the white man's property. That's how the country was built. So when you look at where we are now, we are so far from that model, but we're still following the same rules that were built for that model. So we've just replaced white landowning men with rich asset holding people, which is how a rich asset holding Egyptian can get more money from the United States than an actual American citizen who works a 9-to-5 job in, Mississippi or Louisiana.
Putin, Xi, Kim Jong-un, they're all in power forever. Which one actually launches a nuclear weapon first?
Kim Jong-un.
Really?
Kim Jong-un, without a doubt. He's the least strategically mature of the three of them. Russia has I would say Russia is the most likely to deploy a nuclear weapon. But deploying a nuclear weapon doesn't have to look like launching a nuclear missile, right? Russia's the kind of country that could create a suitcase nuke, put it into a truck, drive it through Russia into Belarus, where a Belarusian soldier drives the truck across into Kiev, and a nuke goes off in Kiev. And the reason that would benefit Russia is because the nuke goes off in Kiev, it's tracked back to Belarus, which means the United States doesn't take action against Russia. Because can you justify launching nuclear missiles against a country that can't even be identified as being responsible for a truck that was driven from Belarus? That kind of confusion freezes strategic action, right? So a Russian nuke is the most likely nuke that we'll see deployed. But we already see Kim Jong-un in North Korea launching practice missiles twice a year right now at a higher rate than he ever has. They just created a whole new enrichment plant. They are actively expanding their military. They are actively showing aggression, not only towards South Korea, but also towards Japan. And they get a blank check from countries like Russia and China, because if North Korea can be a thorn in everybody's side, then Russia and China stay off the map. So they can just pay a fee and somebody else gets all the attention. So for that reason, it's the most likely that if you're going to see a nuclear weapon actually launched, it'll be from Kim Jong-un.
So Putin's been in power for 26 years. Xi's there for life. Kim Jong-un inherited a country, right, compared to America, where the president changes every 4 years. Which one of these men do you think comes out most powerful in the long run?
Xi Jinping, China, without a doubt. And it's because of partially what you said, but also partially because of the way the systems work, right? Putin is heavily dependent on a group of oligarchs that he has to keep rich in order for those oligarchs to support him. Kim Jong-un, the people of North Korea have no power, and the only way that Kim Jong-un comes out of power is if a foreign country invades and takes him or kills him, right? Because he's essentially the son of the son of the son of the sun god, right? That was his father and his grandfather before him. So the people of North Korea are not going to take down their own leader, and the people of Russia won't take down their leader, but the oligarchs will. But if he makes the oligarchs rich, then they'll let him stay in power. Xi Jinping, on the other hand, is the only one that has shown that he can actually use the system to create kind of a self-licking ice cream cone where the system eradicates his own competition. It's not about keeping people rich. It's about running a communist party where he can create these campaigns against corruption, and those campaigns against corruption can partially take out corrupt leaders, but also partially take out competitors. So he can keep kind of cleansing the system, kind of like how a bottom feeder keeps your fish tank clean. He has this process of doing that. There's also no reason, there's no end in sight for when the Chinese Communist Party won't continually re-elect him, where Putin kind of has to fight for it every 4 years, and Kim Jong-un is just, born to it forever. And that's before we even touch on the economies themselves. The economy in China is exponentially larger than the economy in North Korea, and the technological advantage and industrial capacity of China is significantly greater than that of Russia. Russia is powerless without its satellite states, which is why Putin is always locked in competition to try to tap into these former Soviet satellite states to get more resources. China is fully self-sufficient. So the reason that China is the second largest economy in the world, when 30 years ago, it didn't even have internet, right? It's because they're able to progress so fast because they have a efficient singular party model that makes them like, a communist dictatorship, but it makes them highly economically efficient. And that's where their power comes from. Xi Jinping would have to make massive mistakes to actually lose the power that they will project in the future, which is why when you read every national security estimate in the United States, there is only one primary threat to the United States: China. All this shit that took us to Venezuela and Mexico and Iran is a distraction. That every government document out there will tell you China is the most strategically significant threat to the United States.
Interesting. Yeah. And on that, everyone's watching China and Russia. Is India the country we should actually be looking out for?
Yes and no.
Or are we paying attention to?
Yeah, it's a difficult question because it depends on what you're concerned with. If you're concerned about military power, you don't have to worry about India. If you're concerned about supply chain and economic uncertainty, India is a big one to watch. India is stepping in to the shoes that China used to maintain for 30 years. They are becoming the manufacturing center of the world. And India is a very politically savvy country. They know how to wedge themselves between adversaries and then kind of play mom against dad and dad against mom. So when you have both of those skills, the ability to manufacture inexpensively and quickly, the ability to control supply chains around the world, and also the ability to politically pit mom against dad, you have the ability to make a huge mess. And everybody wants to be your friend. And that's exactly what's happening in India. And Modi is a fantastic leader for that time because he's able to stand on his own 2 feet and tell the United States he's not going to cooperate, but still maintain trade ties with the United States that prevents him from getting, penalized with tariffs. And he's able to continue to do, sell oil, buy oil, and carry out trade with Russia, with Iran, and with China without falling under scrutiny from any of them. So India is a very interesting player in the future because they kind of sit at the hub of a hub and spoke of global supply. And they didn't used to be in that role until China stepped out of that role to focus on being a first world country.
Yeah, it's interesting because they're allies. India is allies with America, Russia, and China, right? So that's something that most people maybe overlook. But
correct. And they're only really enemies with Pakistan. And Pakistan is also an ally of the United States and Russia and China.
Okay. Give me your single most boring piece of advice for the person watching who wants to be harder to manipulate.
I would say don't talk.
Silence. That's what I was thinking because we talked about earlier. I was like, it has to be silence, right?
It's super powerful. And even if they are winning, even if they are manipulating you, if you don't say anything, they don't know that it's working, right? So even if your defenses falter, you don't give them the satisfaction of knowing that it's working.
For the young people out there watching this, right? What's the one skill they should start building other than listening? Because I know that's maybe one of the ones top on your list, listening, right? Silence is probably important if you don't want to be manipulated. When you're trying to not manipulate someone, but let's say build a relationship or get some value from another person, what's right up there? What's the number one skill?
It's something we call vetting. So the problem with young people is that they don't know what information is real, what information isn't real. They don't understand how to take two pieces of information and then compare them against each other to test them for veracity or truthfulness. So that process is called vetting. One of the easiest ways that you can vet information is read diametrically opposed information. So if you are naturally left-leaning, read all of your left-leaning news, but then also read all of the right-leaning news about the same topic. And where the two say the same thing, there's a high chance that it's the truth. And where the two say different things, there's a good chance that it's false. So if you want to find real information in this information warfare landscape that we live in, you have to learn how to vet. If one friend says one thing, you need to talk to somebody who's not your friend to find out what they say. If you think a girl likes you, or if you think there's a job opportunity, if you whatever, find the person who has a bias that's in line with you, and then find a person who has a bias that's not at all in line with you, and then find out where the two stories match up and where they don't, if you want to find real truth. If you're a young person and you're not interested in finding real truth, or if you're a young person and you just feel outraged that people don't tell the truth, you are exactly the kind of person that everyone else is taking advantage of.
Reminds me of Charlie Munger, who is like, you should understand the opposing side better than you understand your own position, and that's going to give you some good perspective.
Absolutely.
You said that when the US and China reach economic parity, being inside either country becomes the most dangerous place on earth. And you've said you're leaving America in 2027. Should the rest of us be worried?
Yes, you should all be worried. That's what I've been telling you for 2 years. You should be worried. Economic parity is the worst thing that you can ask for, which is something that most people never really thought of, because we believe what we've been told about equality and fairness and free markets. The reason the United States is such a comfortable, safe place to live is because nobody has parity with the United States. Nobody makes as much money. Nobody has as many weapons. Nobody has as modern a military. Nobody has a pipeline for innovation. The United States is only peaceful and safe. So peaceful and safe that the people watching this are more concerned with what show they watch on Netflix than they are with their own food security. It's because nobody is close to us. It's because we don't play fair. It's because we don't have parity, which is another way of saying equality. China is firmly in the number 2 slot. So for the average Chinese person, they don't have any of the pressure of being the largest, the biggest, or the best. And as soon as you become the largest, the biggest, or the best, everybody hates you. The United States actually has no allies. 160 other countries hate us. They just cooperate with us when it helps them. And as soon as we're not number 1, all 160 of those countries are going to hate somebody else, because somebody else will become the new number 1. So China doesn't have to carry that burden yet. But as soon as the two countries become equal, 160 countries hate both of you. And the threat that you both pose to each other makes it so that the majority of your resources will go into competing against each other so somebody can take the top slot. Because the only position of security is to be number 1. It's to know that everybody else is a threat against you. Only when you know of the threats do you actually have the ability to protect the threats. And when you're equal, you have to put so many resources into the competition, you lose sight of all the other threats. So this is why it's going to be so discouraging, so difficult, so painful for the Americans that live through the day where American supremacy is lost and economic parity is achieved. That will not make us a better planet. That will make us a more war-torn planet.
Do you think that's guaranteed to happen? And if not, what needs to change for you to stay here?
It's absolutely unavoidable that the United States will fail at some point. Doesn't mean it's going to happen in the next 10 years, but at some point the United States empire will collapse and it will be replaced by something else. No guarantee that's going to be a Chinese empire. It could be something else. You can't read the future, and technology is changing everything on a daily basis. So for all we know, the United States and China launched some kind of crazy cyber attack on each other, and we obliterate all of our technology, and India comes up as the world leader. We don't know. But history has shown us, from the Romans to the Ottomans to the British to the Soviets, everybody collapses, right? Everybody collapses at some point. Does that mean that people, like, what would it take for me to stay in the United States? A big part of what's driving me out of my own country is a desire to keep my children in a place where they can recognize and value their own blessings as American citizens. Inside the United States, we're all fucking spoiled. Nobody appreciates being an American. If they honestly appreciate being an American, they're over the age of 50. They've lived through the hardship. They've really seen, holy smokes, the world is a dangerous and scary place, and we're lucky to be here. Everybody else, like I said, takes their food scarcity for advantage, or takes advantage of the fact that they have food, takes advantage of the fact that they have electricity 24 hours a day. When their internet goes down for an hour, they're pissed. That's the world that we live in as Americans, right? As long as that's what we're focused on, we are missing the rest of the world. So I don't want my children to miss that. And I know that if they live in the United States and they are raised in the United States, they will always take it for granted. So I need to get them out. I need to get them into another country where they understand that culture and they could juxtapose it against American culture. They can see the difference in people. They can see the difference in everything from how we get our food to how we drive on the road to, what happens when there's an accident or when law enforcement is called into play, so that they can actually become global citizens. They can recognize with perspective at a young age, what's it mean to be American? What's it mean to be somebody else? Because if you're in the United States, right now there are Americans who believe that to be an American, you have to be like super conservative, make America great again, which assumes that America isn't great, right? There's a whole line of young people who are being brainwashed into believing political narratives on both sides that aren't accurate and have nothing to do with what it actually means to be an American, to believe in freedom, to believe in service, to believe in opportunity. That's what it actually means to be an American. That's not what's being talked about by either side. So I need my children to be surrounded, immersed in an environment where they can actually develop those skills. And then second to that, I need to keep my whole family safe. And inside the United States, it's more shootings than ever before. There's less reliability in your own law enforcement. We have ICE raiding people's houses. We have, FBI, questions of corruption in the FBI investigating each other. Like, our own law enforcement agencies can't enforce the law because they're distracted by other things, which is just an open book for all the criminals out there who are carrying out lower level crimes that will actually affect you and me, but don't make the threshold for FBI attention. So if I want to keep my family safe and set them up for the real future, because let's not forget, if the United States and China have parity in our lifetime, guess what fucking language you're going to have to learn? Chinese. You will have to learn Chinese. It won't be an option. The only way you're going to learn Chinese as an adult is if you've learned another language first. So if I can take my children anywhere, to Albania, to Portugal, to Brazil, if I can teach them how to learn another language, then when the day comes that they have to learn Chinese, they'll learn it faster than everybody else. And economic parity is something that economists believe is within the next 7 to 10 years. Not even political strategists, right? Just actual number counting, number crunching economists. I got to prepare my kids for that. And anybody who wants to believe that America is going to pave the way, that some tree hugger or some warmonger is going to come through and save the day, that's not what I believe in. I believe in preparing my kids now for the world that they will have to deal with later. Whether they have to deal with it in 10 years or 30 years is irrelevant. It will come.
What countries are you looking at?
I will tell you the list, but I'm not telling you which one we've landed on, right? There's very good options out there. Czechoslovakia is a good option. Albania is a good option. Costa Rica is a very popular option. Portugal is always in the top of the list. Singapore is always very high on the list. New Zealand and Australia are great opportunities if you don't want to change your language. Great Britain is a horrible place to be if you're a Briton, but it's a great place to be if you're an American. So it's also something to consider there. I personally tend to favor the European continent because of all the countries that have lost their mind. The European continent is the least crazy. They're still very left-leaning and liberal, but they've been that way for a long time, whereas they're not going through the massive left and right swings that you're seeing in South America. They're not like on the front doorstep of China's hegemony like everything else in Asia. And if you really just want to fall off the map, like, I can't say enough good things about Australia and New Zealand.
Would you maintain your U.S. citizenship?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not like we're ashamed of being American. We are disappointed. I am disappointed in what America has become temporarily, but I still believe that America could change. I still believe that Americans will rediscover what they actually value and care about. We just have to have those 4 superficial concerns burned away before we get back to the same primal needs that our American revolutionary ancestors once had.
Andrew, thank you so much for coming on Decoded Genius.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, man.